His comeback was the stuff of legend. He was clad in black leather, lean and dangerous. The energy was electric. He had reclaimed his throne. Then he went to Vegas, and for 7 years he performed for the world from a gilded cage. He sold out 636 consecutive shows at the International Hotel, a record that still stands. Millions of people saw him. Billions of dollars were made. But behind the sequin jumpsuits and the thunderous applause, a different story was unfolding. A story of isolation, paranoia, and a slow, tragic decline. We saw the public image. We rarely saw the man. And what happened in those Vegas years is filled with questions. Questions about his health, his money, his relationships, and his mind. The official story is one of excess, a rock and roll cliche. But the truth is always more complex. What was really going on in that penthouse suite high above the neon desert? What secrets did the walls of Graceland West hold? Here are some of the mysteries that still surround the King's final reign. Number 15. Why did he keep performing when he was so clearly unwell? The last years were hard to watch. Even through the grainy footage of the 1977 CBS special, Elvis in Concert, you can see it. He was bloated, sweating, and struggling to catch his breath. He forgot the lyrics to his own iconic songs. He leaned on a microphone stand for support. His stage banter, once charming and self-deprecating, had become rambling and sometimes incoherent. Yet, the shows went on. Night after night, city after city. The final concert was in Indianapolis on June 26, 1977. He died less than 2 months later. The most obvious question is why? Why was a man in such a state of physical and mental distress still being pushed onto a stage? The simple answer is money, and that answer leads directly to his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Parker's contract with Elvis was legendary. He took an unprecedented 50% of Elvis's earnings. This was far above the standard 10 or 15% for managers. To keep his own massive income flowing, Parker needed Elvis working. In Vegas, followed by relentless touring, was a cash machine. Alana Nash, in her definitive biography, The Colonel, The Extraordinary Story of Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis Presley, details how Parker's own gambling debts in the Las Vegas casinos created a powerful incentive to keep Elvis on stage. The International Hotel and later the Las Vegas Hilton would allegedly forgive some of Parker's debts in exchange for securing another block of Elvis performances. Elvis was, in essence, working to pay off his manager's gambling losses. He was trapped in a financial arrangement that demanded he perform, healthy or not. But the Colonel wasn't the only one. Elvis himself had enormous expenses. He supported a huge entourage, the Memphis Mafia. He paid for their homes, cars, and families. Graceland itself was a massive expense. His generosity was legendary. He'd buy cars for strangers. He had a lifestyle to maintain. Vernon Presley, his own father, was in charge of the finances at Graceland. He was known to be conservative with money, and he likely reinforced the idea that Elvis had to keep working to keep the whole enterprise afloat. The machine was too big to stop. There was also a deeper, more psychological reason. The stage was Elvis's world. It was the one place he felt truly alive and in control. In his penthouse suite, he was isolated and bored. On stage, he had the love of thousands of people, a direct and powerful drug of its own. In the book, Elvis and Me, Priscilla Presley describes how he fed off the energy of the crowd. It was his validation. Without it, who was he? Just a lonely man in a big house. Linda Thompson, his girlfriend for much of the mid-70s, has spoken about how he would come alive just before a show, the adrenaline kicking in. The performance was an escape from his reality. He might have been physically sick, but the emotional sickness of stopping, of being alone with his thoughts, might have seemed even worse. And then there was the role of Dr. George Nicopolis, or Dr. Nick. He was Elvis's personal physician. He provided the vast cocktail of prescription drugs that kept Elvis going. Stimulants to get him up for a show, painkillers for his various ailments, and powerful sleeping pills to bring him down afterward. The 1981 trial of Dr. Nick revealed the staggering extent of these prescriptions. In the last year of Elvis's life alone, Dr. Nick had prescribed over 10,000 doses of various drugs. Was he a caring doctor trying to manage an unmanageable patient's chronic pain and insomnia? Or was he an enabler paid handsomely to keep the star functional enough to walk out on stage and generate revenue? The verdict of that trial acquitted him of criminal wrongdoing, but the ethical questions remain. He was the medical professional who could have, and arguably should have, stepped in and said no more. But he didn't. So you have a perfect storm: a manager with a financial stranglehold and gambling debts, an artist with massive expenses and a psychological addiction to performing, a doctor willing to supply the chemical means to keep the show on the road, and an entourage of friends and family whose livelihoods depended on the machine continuing to run. No one, it seems, had the power or the courage to stop it, but what if he had tried to stop? Could the colonel have been fired? What if Elvis had simply canceled a tour and checked into a hospital for 6 months? Would his financial world have collapsed? Was he actually afraid of what would happen if the music stopped? Or was he, on some level, performing a slow public suicide, unable to imagine any other way out? We know why the machine kept running, but we may never know if Elvis himself truly wanted it to stop. Number 14, what was the true nature of his relationship with the other Vegas stars? In Las Vegas in the 1970s was a constellation of superstars. Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack had defined the city in the previous decade. Now, a new generation of headliners ruled the Strip. Tom Jones, Engelbert Humperdinck, Sammy Davis Jr., and Glenn Campbell were all drawing massive crowds. And at the center of it all was Elvis Presley, the biggest star of them all, a resident king at the International Hotel. On the surface, it seemed like a fraternity of legends. They would attend each other's shows, and they would pose for photos backstage. But what was the reality of these relationships? Was it a genuine friendship, a professional rivalry, or something else entirely? The relationship with Tom Jones is particularly interesting. Jones was a powerhouse performer with a similar high-energy sexual stage presence. They were often seen as rivals for the title of Vegas's top male performer. But by all accounts, they had a deep and genuine friendship. Tom Jones has spoken many times about their connection. He recalls visiting Elvis in his dressing room or his suite after shows. They would sing gospel songs together until dawn. And Jones said Elvis was often searching for spiritual meaning and would ask him about his life in Wales, a world away from the Vegas bubble. He saw a vulnerability in Elvis that the public never did. Their friendship seemed to be based on a shared experience that few others could understand: the pressure and isolation of being a global sex symbol locked into the Vegas grind. His connection with Sammy Davis Jr. was also one of mutual respect. Sammy was a trailblazer, a member of the Rat Pack who broke racial barriers in Vegas. Elvis admired his talent immensely. There are photos of them together, laughing, clearly at ease. Both men were electric performers who left everything on the stage. They understood the craft and the sacrifice involved. Jerry Schilling, a close friend of Elvis, wrote in his book Me and a Guy Named Elvis about Elvis's admiration for other performers. He wasn't arrogant, he was a student of music and performance, and he respected the talent of his peers. The relationship with Frank Sinatra, however, was more complex and distant. There were two different generations of American icon. Sinatra was the chairman of the board, the established ruler of Vegas. Elvis was the rock and roll upstart who had become a new kind of king. They had a famous TV special together in 1960, Welcome Home Elvis, after he returned from the army. The on-screen chemistry was professional, but there was an underlying tension. Sinatra had famously called rock and roll the most brutal, ugly, degenerate, vicious form of expression in the 1950s. While his views had likely softened, they represented two different worlds. In Vegas, they moved in different circles. There was a professional courtesy, but not the warm friendship he shared with Tom Jones. They were two planets in the same solar system, but they kept a respectful distance. But even with these connections, Elvis remained profoundly isolated. Most of these interactions happened in the controlled environment of backstage or a hotel suite. Elvis couldn't just go out for a drink at a casino bar with Tom Jones. He was a prisoner of his own fame. His Memphis Mafia formed a protective and isolating wall around him. They were his friends, his employees, his security. They were the only people he socialized with on a daily basis. So while he had relationships with other stars, they were fleeting moments of connection in a life lived largely in a bubble. He would go from his suite to the stage and back to his suite. His world was tiny. This isolation is key to understanding his Vegas years. He might have been in the entertainment capital of the world, surrounded by the biggest names in the business, but he was profoundly lonely. The stories of staying up all night, watching TV, and eating are not just rock star excess, they are signs of a man with too much time on his hands and too few genuine peers to share it with. So, what do we still not know? Did he ever have a truly candid conversation with Sinatra about fame and its costs? Did he feel a sense of competition with Tom Jones, even if they were friends? Did he ever envy the freedom that other, less famous performers had? And did any of these other stars see the tragedy unfolding and try to intervene? Or was there an unwritten code in Vegas to mind your own business and let the show go on? Number 13, was he trying to send a message with his onstage rants? Toward the end of his life, something changed in Elvis's stage persona. The charming, funny banter that had endeared him to audiences for years began to morph into something darker and more erratic. He would stop songs midway through. He would launch into long, rambling monologues. These moments, often called his rants, have become a subject of intense debate among fans and biographers. Were they just the confused ramblings of a man under the influence of powerful prescription drugs? Or was he trying, in his own muddled way, to send a message to the world, to break through the polished image and show the man who was suffering underneath? These rants covered a wide range of topics. He would talk about his personal life, making veiled references to his divorce from Priscilla. He would complain about tabloid rumors and the book Elvis, What Happened, written by his former bodyguards. He would talk about his love for karate, his search for God, and his frustrations with the world. Most famous rants occurred in August 1974 during his Vegas engagement. He went on a long, angry tirade about the rumors of his drug use, at one point saying, "If I find or see the guy that wrote this, I'm gonna pull his goddamn tongue out by the roots." The anger was real, raw, and shocking to the audience. Some observers believe these were cries for help. In this view, Elvis felt trapped by his image, by the Colonel, and by his own life. The stage was the only place he had a microphone and a captive audience. He couldn't just call a press conference. So he used his show as a platform to vent his frustrations. When he talked about being tired or feeling unwell, he wasn't just making small talk, he was telling the truth. When he lashed out at the tabloids, he was expressing the genuine pain of a man who felt his privacy had been stripped away. These weren't performances, they were raw, unfiltered moments of reality breaking through the artifice of a Vegas show. Others argue that the rants were primarily a symptom of his drug use. The combination of uppers, downers, and painkillers he was taking would have had a profound effect on his judgment, emotional regulation, and cognitive function. His paranoia was likely heightened by the drugs. His thoughts would have been disorganized. In this interpretation, the rants weren't a coherent attempt to send a message, but rather the public manifestation of a mind clouded by a toxic chemical cocktail. The witnesses from his band and entourage have described how his behavior could be erratic and unpredictable during this period, and the rants were simply what happened when that behavior spilled out onto the stage. A third possibility is that it was a combination of both. The drugs may have lowered his inhibitions and loosened his tongue, but the thoughts and frustrations he expressed were genuine. The drugs didn't create the anger and sadness. They just removed the filter that had previously kept him from expressing them in public. He was a man under immense pressure, and the cracks were beginning to show. For example, he would often talk about his love for the book, The Impersonal Life, a spiritual text that was very important to him. To the audience, it might have seemed like a bizarre tangent, but to Elvis, it was a desperate attempt to talk about something that mattered to him, something beyond Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock. The reaction from his team was telling. The Colonel was reportedly furious about the rants. They were bad for business. They shattered the carefully constructed image of Elvis the superstar. His members of his band were often confused, not knowing when he would stop a song or what he was going to say next. It created an atmosphere of unpredictability and tension. This was not the well-oiled machine that had reconquered Vegas in 1969. This was something far more volatile and tragic, but we are still left with questions. Was there a specific person he was trying to reach with these rants? Priscilla? The Colonel? The bodyguards who had betrayed him? Did he ever listen back to recordings of these shows and realize how he sounded? Or was he so deep in his bubble that he had no self-awareness of how his public outpourings were being perceived? And what if we took every word of his rants literally? What would they tell us about the true state of his soul in those final, lonely years? Number 12, how much did the Colonel's past dictate Elvis's future? Colonel Tom Parker was one of the most famous and controversial managers in music history. He was a master promoter, a shrewd negotiator, and the man who guided Elvis to unprecedented fame and fortune. But the Colonel was also a man with a secret, a big one. He wasn't Tom Parker. He was Andreas Cornelis van Kuijk, born in the Netherlands, and he was an illegal immigrant in the United States, a fact he concealed for his entire life. This single, foundational secret may have had a more profound impact on Elvis's career, particularly during the Vegas years, than anything else. The most glaring question it raises is why Elvis never toured internationally. In the 1960s and 70s, he was arguably the most famous person on the planet. A world tour would have been a monumental success both artistically and financially. The demand was enormous. Offers came in from Japan, Australia, Europe, and South America, promising millions of dollars. But it never happened. Elvis never performed a single concert outside of North America. A few shows in Canada in 1957 were the exception. The official reason given at the time was usually about security concerns or the logistics of transporting his large show. But the real reason was almost certainly the Colonel. If Parker had applied for a U.S. passport to travel with Elvis, his immigration status would have been scrutinized. His lack of a birth certificate and his mysterious past would have come to light. He would have faced investigation and possible deportation. He couldn't risk it. So instead of letting Elvis travel the world with another promoter, he kept him tethered to the United States. And Las Vegas was the perfect anchor. It provided a stable, lucrative, and easily controlled environment. He signed a long-term contract with the International Hotel, locking Elvis into years of performances in one city. It was a brilliant business move, but it also turned Elvis into a domestic act when he should have been a global one. This secret also explains the Aloha from Hawaii satellite broadcast in 1973. It was billed as a way for Elvis to reach his worldwide audience, and it did. It was watched by over 1 billion people, but it was also a clever solution to the Colonel's problem. He could bring the world to Elvis via satellite without Elvis ever having to leave U.S. soil. It was a technological workaround for a deeply personal and secretive issue. Alana Nash's book, The Colonel, dug deep into his past in the Netherlands. She even uncovered speculation that he may have been a suspect in a murder case in his hometown before he fled to America. While this has never been proven, it adds another layer to his intense need for secrecy. He wasn't just an illegal immigrant, he might have been a fugitive. This would have made him even more risk-averse, even more controlling. How did this affect Elvis? It limited him. Artistically, he was denied the chance to experience other cultures and perform for new audiences. It may have contributed to the sense of stagnation and boredom that plagued his later years. The Vegas routine became repetitive. A world tour could have re-energized him. Financially, while he made a fortune in Vegas, he likely missed out on even greater earnings from international tours. But most importantly, it put him under the absolute control of a man whose primary motivation was to protect his own secret. Every career decision was filtered through the lens of the Colonel's legal status. And Elvis's future was dictated by his manager's past, and so the questions linger. Did Elvis ever know the truth about the Colonel's identity? Some, like Priscilla Presley, believe he did, at least in the later years. If he knew, why did he not confront Parker or fire him? Was he so loyal or so dependent that he was willing to sacrifice a global career for his manager's secret? What would Elvis's legacy look like today if he had toured the world in the 1970s? Would the energy of performing in London or Tokyo have pulled him out of his decline? The Colonel's secret wasn't just his own. It became a secret that defined the final chapter of Elvis Presley's life. Number 11, where did all the money go? Elvis Presley was one of the highest paid entertainers in the world during his Las Vegas years. His initial contract with the International Hotel in 1969 was for $100,000 a week, an astronomical sum at the time. This was later renegotiated for even more. He was performing 2 shows a night for weeks at a time to sold-out crowds. He was selling millions of records. The money was flowing in like a river. Yet, throughout his life, and especially after his death, there were persistent questions about his financial situation. For a man who earned so much, why was there always a sense that he was just one step away from being broke? Where did all the money go? The first and most significant drain was Colonel Tom Parker. His 50% commission was an extraordinary bite out of Elvis's gross income. Not his net income after expenses, but his gross. This meant that before a single band member, bodyguard, or expense was paid, the Colonel took half. This is almost unheard of in the entertainment industry. On top of that, Parker also took commissions from merchandise, movie deals, and publishing rights. This financial control was total. This arrangement alone meant that Elvis was only working with half of his potential income from the very start. Then there were the immense costs of the Elvis Presley enterprise. His touring show was a massive production. He had a full band, backup singers, and an orchestra. He had a road crew, sound engineers, and lighting technicians. He also had his personal entourage, the Memphis Mafia. This group of friends and family were on the payroll. Elvis paid their salaries, their travel expenses, and often much more. He was famous for his generosity, buying them cars, jewelry, and even houses. This wasn't just a few friends at times. The entourage numbered a dozen or more people. Their livelihood was entirely dependent on him. Graceland itself was a huge financial commitment. It was not just a home, it was a compound. There were property taxes, maintenance, staff, and utilities. And Elvis was constantly buying things, cars, motorcycles, jewelry, and his famous private jet, the Lisa Marie, which cost a fortune to buy and maintain. His spending was impulsive and legendary. He wasn't an investor, he was a spender. He enjoyed the pleasure of giving gifts and living lavishly. He didn't seem to think about the future. The tax situation was also a major factor. With his level of income, he was in the highest tax bracket. Without sophisticated financial planning and tax shelters, a huge portion of his earnings went straight to the IRS. The Colonel's management style was focused on generating immediate cash flow, not on long-term wealth management. It was about booking the next gig, not planning for retirement. When Elvis died in 1977, his estate was valued at around $5 million. While that was a lot of money then, it was shockingly low for a star of his magnitude. It was a testament to the high burn rate of his lifestyle, the Colonel's commission, and the lack of savvy financial planning. It was his ex-wife, Priscilla Presley, who later took control of the estate and, through opening Graceland to the public and other business ventures, turned it into the $100 million enterprise it is today. But during his lifetime, the cash was going out almost as fast as it was coming in. This constant financial pressure helps explain why he kept up the grueling performance schedule, even when his health was failing. He had to. The entire ecosystem around him depended on it. He was the sun, and dozens of other planets revolved around him, all drawing from his light and his warmth. If he stopped shining, their worlds would go dark. But even knowing all this, it's hard to fully comprehend the numbers. How can a man earn what would be the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars today and have so little to show for it in terms of net worth? Were there other deals the Colonel made that we don't know about? How much money did the Colonel himself lose in the Vegas casinos, and was Elvis's work directly paying for it? Was Elvis aware of how precarious his financial situation sometimes was, or was he shielded from the details by his father and the Colonel? The money trail from the Vegas years is a tangled one, and it reveals a story not of wealth, but of a golden river flowing endlessly through a sieve. Number 10. How real were the death threats in 1970? In the summer of 1970, during a highly successful engagement at the International Hotel, the atmosphere of excitement in Las Vegas was pierced by a chilling threat. The FBI received intelligence that Elvis Presley was the target of an assassination plot. According to the report, a man was planning to kill Elvis on stage during one of his performances. This was not a vague rumor. It was treated as a credible threat by both federal law enforcement and Elvis's own security team. The incident had a profound and lasting impact on Elvis's psyche, escalating his already significant concerns about his personal safety. The threat was specific. The FBI file, now declassified, states that a man had called their office claiming he was going to be paid to kill Elvis. The motive was allegedly tied to a romantic dispute involving the man's wife, who was infatuated with Elvis. The hotel management was notified, and security was massively increased. The Memphis Mafia, Elvis's entourage of bodyguards and friends, went on high alert. They were already armed, but now they were positioned strategically around the stage and in the audience, watching for any suspicious moves. Elvis was informed of the threat. Instead of canceling the shows, he decided to go on, but he took his own precautions. He was a known collector of firearms and held a black belt in karate. For the shows following the threat, he reportedly carried a pistol in his boot and another tucked into his waistband under his jumpsuit. His band members and backup singers were terrified. They knew he was armed, and they knew there was a potential gunman in the audience. The tension on stage was palpable. During one show, Elvis directly addressed the situation from the stage. He told the audience, "I'm sorry I'm not moving around a lot tonight, but I've had a threat." He then dramatically revealed that he was armed, a move that shocked both his band and the crowd. He reportedly told his friends backstage that if he saw anyone make a move, he was going to take him out. It was a moment where the line between the entertainer and the paranoid, protected man completely blurred. The threat never materialized. No one was ever arrested. The shows continued without incident. But the psychological damage was done. The event seemed to confirm Elvis's deepest fears about the dangers of his own fame. It reinforced his belief that he needed to be surrounded by his own private army and that he needed to be personally armed at all times. His interest in law enforcement memorabilia, collecting police badges, and his famous visit to President Nixon to become a federal agent at large can all be seen in the context of this heightened state of paranoia. He wanted official symbols of power to protect himself from a world he increasingly saw as threatening. This incident also reveals the dark side of the intense fan devotion he inspired. The love he received from the crowd was the thing that sustained him, but he was also acutely aware of how quickly that love could curdle into obsession and danger. The Vegas stage, which was his sanctuary, had suddenly become a potential shooting gallery. But questions remain about the incident. How credible was the threat, really? Was it a genuine plot, or the rambling of a disturbed individual that the FBI was obligated to investigate? The fact that no one was ever caught leaves the source of the threat a mystery. Did the intense security measures actually deter an attack, or was there never an attacker to begin with? How much did this single event contribute to his later reclusiveness and reliance on prescription drugs to cope with the anxiety? And was his decision to go on stage armed and defiant an act of courage, or a reckless and dangerous piece of bravado fueled by a sense of invincibility? The 1970 death threat is a stark reminder that behind the glamour of Vegas, there was a constant undercurrent of real-world danger. Number 9. What was the final straw for Priscilla? The love story of Elvis and Priscilla Presley is central to the Elvis legend. They met when she was just 14. They married in Las Vegas in 1967. Their daughter, Lisa Marie, was born exactly 9 months later. To the public, they were the perfect couple, the king and his beautiful, young queen. But behind the gates of Graceland and later in the surreal world of Las Vegas, their marriage was under immense strain. They separated in 1972, and their divorce was finalized in 1973. The question that has always lingered is, what was the final straw that led Priscilla to leave the biggest star in the world? In her book, Elvis and Me, Priscilla lays out the story from her perspective. It wasn't one single event, but a slow erosion of a relationship under extraordinary circumstances. A key factor was Elvis's lifestyle, which became supercharged in Las Vegas. He lived a nocturnal existence, sleeping all day and staying up all night after his shows. His world was his penthouse suite and his small circle of friends, the Memphis Mafia. Priscilla was expected to adapt to this bizarre schedule, to be available whenever he was awake. It was an insular, isolated life with little contact with the outside world. His infidelity was also a major issue. Elvis had affairs throughout his career, but the environment of Las Vegas, with its constant stream of beautiful women and admirers, exacerbated the problem. Priscilla was aware of his dalliances. While she may have tried to look the other way, it inevitably took a toll on her self-esteem and the foundation of their marriage. She felt more like one of his possessions than a wife and a partner. Crucially, Priscilla felt she had lost her own identity. She had been shaped by Elvis since she was a teenager. He dictated how she wore her hair, her makeup, her clothes. He had molded her into his ideal woman. As she entered her late 20s, she began to realize she didn't know who she was outside of her role as Miss Elvis Presley. She wanted to discover her own interests, her own friends, her own life. This desire for self-discovery was incompatible with the cloistered life he had created for her. The arrival of Las Vegas also signaled a change in Elvis himself. The creative energy of the '68 comeback special seemed to dissipate into the repetitive grind of the Vegas shows. He became more dependent on prescription drugs to manage his sleep schedule and the demands of performing. This led to mood swings and a growing distance between them. He was present physically, but often absent emotionally and mentally. The final straw appears to have been her own affair. Priscilla began a relationship with Mike Stone, a karate instructor whom Elvis himself had introduced to her. This was a pivotal moment. For the first time, she had found something for herself, a relationship where she was seen as an individual. She has said that her feelings for Stone were a symptom of the problems in her marriage, not the cause. But Her decision to pursue that relationship was her declaration of independence. It was her way of saying she could no longer live in Elvis's shadow. Their separation was surprisingly amicable. They famously held hands as they left the courthouse after their divorce. They remained close friends until his death, co-parenting their daughter Lisa Marie. This suggests that their decision to split was not born of hate, but of a sad realization that they could not be the partners they needed to be for each other. Elvis's lifestyle and the prison of fame he had constructed simply did not have room for an equal partnership. But what do we not know? How much did Elvis's spiritual searching and bizarre nocturnal habits push her away? Was there one specific argument, one night of profound loneliness that made her realize she had to leave? How did Elvis truly react in private when she told him she was leaving? Was he angry, heartbroken? Or, as some have suggested, was he almost relieved to be free of the responsibilities of being a husband? The end of their marriage marked the end of an era and the beginning of Elvis's final lonely decline. Number 8. How much unheard music is still in the vaults. For fans of any legendary artist, the dream is the same: the lost tapes. The idea that somewhere in a climate-controlled vault there are hours of unreleased recordings, alternate takes, and unheard songs. In the case of Elvis Presley, this dream is particularly potent. During his Vegas years, he was performing 2 shows a night, 7 days a week for a month at a time. His repertoire was vast, and he was known to be spontaneous on stage, pulling out old gospel songs or new covers on a whim. The question is, how much of this was professionally recorded and what happened to it? RCA Records, his label, did record a number of his Las Vegas shows. These recordings resulted in classic live albums like Onstage 1970 and Elvis as recorded at Madison Square Garden 1972. Though the latter was in New York, it was part of the touring that Vegas made possible. The 1973 Aloha from Hawaii special was also a massive professionally recorded event. In recent years, Elvis's estate and RCA Legacy Recordings have released a treasure trove of material for collectors, including soundboard recordings of many Vegas concerts. A soundboard recording is a direct feed from the mixing desk, offering much higher quality than a bootleg recorded from the audience. These releases have given us a much clearer picture of what the shows were like, warts and all. We can hear the rambling monologues, the forgotten lyrics, and also the moments of pure brilliance when his voice was still in its prime. They show an artist who was often bored with his biggest hits but came alive when singing gospel or a new soulful ballad. But the mystery is what else exists. Colonel Parker was notorious for wanting to record everything, believing that any performance could be monetized. It's highly likely that many more shows were recorded either professionally by RCA or on simpler soundboard setups than have ever been released. These tapes could be sitting in vaults, their existence known only to a handful of people. They might be mislabeled, forgotten, or held back for future release. There is also the question of studio recordings. During the 1970s, Elvis's studio output became more sporadic. He recorded primarily in Nashville and Memphis, and even had a recording studio built at Graceland. But was there ever any recording done in Las Vegas? Did he ever book a studio for a late-night session after a show to lay down an idea? It seems unlikely, given his schedule, but not impossible. The stories of him singing gospel songs with his friends in his hotel suite until dawn are legendary. What if someone had the foresight to set up a simple tape recorder during one of those informal jam sessions? The quality might not be perfect, but the intimacy and historical value would be immense. The search for lost tapes is the holy grail for Elvis archivists. Occasionally new material does surface. A forgotten soundboard tape is discovered in a former band member's collection. An alternate take of a familiar song is found on a mislabeled reel. Each discovery is a major event. It offers a new window into his life and his art during a complex period, so the questions remain. How many complete, multi-track professional recordings of Vegas shows are still unreleased by RCA Sony? Are there tapes of the rehearsals he would hold in his suite where he would work out new songs? What happened to the recordings of his opening acts, like comedian Sammy Shore or the Sweet Inspirations? They were part of the show, but their performances are rarely heard, and the biggest question of all is there a recording of a song he sang live that was never recorded in a studio and has never been heard since? For fans, the vaults still hold the promise of hearing the King's voice one more time, as if for the first time. Number 7, was his meeting with Nixon a bizarre stunt or a serious plea? Of all the strange episodes in Elvis Presley's life, his meeting with President Richard Nixon on December 21st, 1970 is perhaps the most surreal. The iconic photograph from the event is famous Elvis in a purple velvet suit with a huge gold belt buckle and sunglasses, shaking hands with the staid, formal President of the United States. The story behind the photo is even stranger. It involves a handwritten letter, a desire to fight drug culture, and a desperate plea to be made a federal agent at large. The mystery is what was really going on in Elvis's head. Was this a serious, if misguided, attempt to contribute to his country, or was it a bizarre, drug-fueled stunt to obtain a federal badge? The story began a few days earlier. After a family argument, Elvis impulsively flew from Memphis to Washington, D.C. On the plane, he handwrote a 5-page letter to President Nixon. In it, he expressed his admiration for the president and his concern about the direction the country was heading, particularly regarding the drug culture, the hippie elements, the SDS, Black Panthers, etc. He wrote that he wanted to help. He explained that as a famous entertainer, he could reach young people in a way the government couldn't. He requested a meeting with Nixon and, most importantly, asked to be made a federal agent at large for the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. Through a series of fortunate connections, the letter was delivered and a meeting was hastily arranged. Elvis arrived at the White House with gifts for the president, including a commemorative World War II Colt .45 pistol. In the Oval Office, Elvis passionately made his case. According to the notes of Eagle Bud Krogh, the White House aide who set up the meeting, Elvis spoke about how he felt the Beatles had been a negative influence on American youth. He repeated his desire for a federal badge, believing it would give him the authority to help in the war on drugs. Nixon, seeing a political opportunity to connect with a huge cultural figure, was receptive. He agreed to give Elvis an honorary badge. The irony, of course, is staggering. Here was Elvis Presley, a man who would later die from an overdose of prescription drugs, passionately volunteering to fight the war on drugs. This leads to the central question of his motivation. On one hand, his concern could have been genuine. Elvis was a deeply patriotic man. He had served his country in the army. He held conservative social views. He may have truly believed that the country was in decline and that he had a duty to help. He saw the badge not as a toy, but as a real tool that would allow him to do some good. On the other hand, the meeting can be seen as a manifestation of his growing paranoia and detachment from reality. He had an obsession with law enforcement. He collected police badges from departments all over the country. He loved the symbols of authority. A federal badge would be the ultimate prize. Some have argued that he wanted the badge so he could travel with his guns and his prescription drugs without being hassled by law enforcement. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card. In this view, his anti-drug rhetoric was just a means to an end. The truth is likely somewhere in between. His desire to help was probably sincere, but his understanding of the problem was naive and simplistic. And his desire for the badge was undoubtedly tied to his obsession with power and his belief that he was above the normal rules. He was living in a world where his every whim was catered to. If he wanted to meet the president and get a federal badge, why shouldn't he be able to? The meeting is a perfect snapshot of the hermetically sealed reality of his Vegas years. He was so isolated from normal life that this bizarre quest seemed perfectly reasonable to him. But we are still left wondering, what did he actually intend to do with the badge? Did he envision himself conducting undercover operations? Did Nixon take any of it seriously, or was it purely a photo opportunity for him? And how did this event, this official validation from the highest office in the land, feed into Elvis's growing sense of invincibility and his detachment from the consequences of his own actions? The meeting was a moment of pure high-level absurdity, a collision of politics and pop culture that raises more questions than it answers. Number 6. What was the true purpose of his karate obsession? Elvis Presley's love for karate was not a casual hobby. It was a deep, lifelong passion that became an integral part of his identity, especially during his Las Vegas years. He was first introduced to it in the Army. He trained seriously, eventually earning an 8th degree black belt. He founded his own karate school in Memphis, but in Vegas, his karate obsession reached its peak. It was incorporated into his stage shows with high kicks and dramatic fighting stances becoming a signature of his jumpsuit era. It was also a central part of his private life. The question is, what was he searching for in karate? Was it a form of physical discipline, a spiritual path, or a manifestation of his growing paranoia? On the surface, karate was a way for him to stay in shape and to create a more dynamic stage show. The 1968 comeback special had shown a lean, physical Elvis. The karate moves in his Vegas shows were an attempt to maintain that image of power and vitality. They added a theatrical flair to his performances. In the early Vegas years, these moves were sharp and impressive. They showcased his athleticism and added a unique, almost superhero-like quality to his persona. But karate was much more than just choreography for Elvis. It was a spiritual and philosophical discipline. He was a voracious reader of spiritual books, and he saw karate as a path to self-improvement and enlightenment. He was fascinated by the idea of mind over matter, of controlling one's body and one's energy. He would spend hours with his instructor, Ed Parker, no relation to the Colonel, discussing the philosophy behind the martial arts. The invasion of his Vegas suite, karate provided structure and a sense of purpose beyond just performing. It was a discipline he could control in a life where he often felt he had little control. However, there was a darker side to his obsession. As his paranoia grew, karate became intertwined with his need for self-protection. He was surrounded by bodyguards, but he believed he needed to be his own ultimate weapon. The death threats in 1970 only intensified this feeling. He wasn't just training for fitness, he was training for combat. He would stage elaborate mock fights with his bodyguards. He became convinced of his own fighting prowess. This sometimes led to dangerous situations where he would get carried away and injure his sparring partners. The karate moves on stage also changed over time. As his health declined and he gained weight, the once sharp kicks and chops became slower and more labored. They began to look like a caricature of his former self. What was once a symbol of his power became, for some critics, a symbol of his decline. He was clinging to the image of a fighter even as his body was failing him. The jumpsuits, which were originally designed to allow for freedom of movement for his karate, became costumes that seemed to trap and emphasize his bloated physique. So, the purpose of his karate obsession was multifaceted. It was a physical workout, a spiritual practice, a form of self-defense, and a key element of his stagecraft. It was all of these things at once. It reflected the best parts of him, his discipline, his spiritual curiosity, and his desire to be a great performer. But it also reflected his darker side, his paranoia, his ego, and his detachment from reality. But deep questions remain. Did he truly believe he was a martial arts master capable of defending himself against any threat? Did his focus on the physical and spiritual discipline of karate provide any real defense against his addiction to prescription drugs? Or was it just another distraction, another elaborate ritual in a life filled with them? And as his health failed, did he look at his black belt and feel like a fraud? Or did the philosophy of karate give him some measure of peace as his body betrayed him? Number 5, was his spiritual quest a genuine search for meaning? Beyond the glamour and the excess, there was another side to Elvis Presley, one that was often hidden from the public. He was a deeply spiritual man, a relentless seeker of knowledge and truth. This quest intensified during his Las Vegas years. In the long, empty hours in his penthouse suite, he didn't just watch television, he read. He devoured hundreds of books on religion, mysticism, and the occult. His personal library was vast and eclectic, containing everything from the Bible to the impersonal life, to books on numerology, theosophy, and Eastern philosophy. The mystery is, was this a genuine, profound search for God and meaning? Or was it the desperate grasping of an isolated, drug-addicted man trying to make sense of a life that had become unmanageable? Elvis's spiritual roots were in the gospel music of the Assembly of God Church he attended as a child. This music stayed with him his entire life. Some of his most passionate and powerful performances, both on and off stage, were of gospel songs. This was the foundation of his faith. But he was also a searcher who believed that no single religion had all the answers. He was looking for universal truths. He was fascinated by the idea that he had a purpose, a destiny that was guided by a higher power. His primary spiritual guide during the Vegas years was Larry Geller, his hairdresser. But Geller was much more than that. He was Elvis's spiritual mentor. He introduced Elvis to a wide range of books and ideas. They would spend countless hours talking about life, death, and the nature of God. Geller has said that Elvis was a true mystic, constantly asking the big questions: why was I chosen? Why me? He felt the weight of his fame and believed there had to be a reason for it beyond just making money and singing rock and roll. This spiritual quest was, for the most part, a private affair, but it occasionally spilled out into his public life. He would sometimes talk about his spiritual beliefs on stage during his rambling monologues. He gave friends copies of his favorite spiritual books. He wore jewelry with spiritual symbols like the Ankh and the Star of David. He saw himself as a spiritual leader to his small, isolated group of friends. However, there is a more cynical way to view this quest. It's possible that his spiritual searching was a way to rationalize his destructive behavior. His use of prescription drugs could be framed not as an addiction, but as a tool for expanding consciousness. His isolation could be seen not as a prison, an escape into a higher realm of thought. It could also be seen as a symptom of his loneliness. He was a man who had everything the material world could offer, but he was still profoundly unhappy. So, he turned to the spiritual world for answers that he couldn't find in his earthly kingdom. The people around him had differing views. Some, like Larry Geller, saw him as a genuine spiritual master. Others, including some members of the Memphis Mafia and Colonel Parker, were skeptical. They saw it as a strange hobby, a phase he was going through. The Colonel in particular was worried that Elvis's spiritual talk would alienate his mainstream audience. He wanted Elvis to be a simple entertainer, not a complex spiritual guru. The paradox is that his spiritual search coexisted with his deep dive into prescription drug abuse. How could a man so dedicated to finding spiritual purity be so committed to a path of chemical self-destruction? Perhaps he saw them as two sides of the same coin, an attempt to escape the confines of his own reality. One path led up, toward God and the light. The other path led down, into the haze of addiction. He was walking both paths at the same time, and that leaves us with the deepest questions. Did he ever find the answers he was looking for? Did his spiritual beliefs bring him any real, lasting peace, or did they just add to his confusion? Was he on the verge of a spiritual breakthrough or a complete mental breakdown? And in his final moments, did he turn to the spiritual teachings that had fascinated him for so long, or was he just a lonely man facing the void? Number 4 were the Memphis Mafia friends or enablers. Elvis Presley was never alone. From the early days of his career until his death, he was surrounded by a group of men known as the Memphis Mafia. They were his friends, his employees, his bodyguards, his road managers, and his constant companions. They lived with him, traveled with him, and formed a protective wall between him and the outside world. In the isolated world of his Las Vegas penthouse, their presence was more constant than ever. The enduring mystery surrounding this group is a fundamental one. Were they loyal friends who had his back, or were they paid enablers who watched him self-destruct and did nothing to stop it? The argument for them being friends is strong. Many of them, like Red West and Sonny West, were his friends from before he was famous. They had a genuine brotherly affection for him. They were fiercely loyal. They protected him from overzealous fans and potential threats. They were the only people in the world who could treat him, at least some of the time, like a normal person. They shared inside jokes, they played football together, they were his connection to his roots in Memphis. In a life that was incredibly abnormal, they provided a semblance of normalcy. Jerry Schilling, another member of the group, has written and spoken extensively about the deep love and camaraderie that existed within the inner circle. They were also his confidants. He was the boss of the king, but he was also a man who needed people to talk to. He would share his fears, his dreams, and his frustrations with them in the late hours of the night. They saw the vulnerable side of Elvis that the public never did. Their loyalty was, in many ways, a response to his immense generosity. He paid them well and took care of their families. They, in turn, dedicated their lives to him. However, the argument that they were enablers is equally powerful and more troubling. Their livelihoods depended entirely on Elvis. They were on his payroll. This created a massive conflict of interest. If they confronted him too forcefully about his drug use or his destructive behavior, they risked being fired and exiled from the group. This excommunication was a real threat, and it happened to people who crossed him. So there was a powerful incentive to keep quiet, to go along with his whims, no matter how dangerous they were. They were the ones who procured his prescription drugs from pharmacies. They were the ones who stood guard outside his bedroom while he slept for days on end. They were the ones who watched his health deteriorate and his performances suffer. Yet, no one was able to stage a successful intervention. No one was able to get him the help he so desperately needed. They were trapped in the same dysfunctional system that he was. He was the source of their income, and his addiction was a part of the daily routine. To challenge one was to risk the other. The ultimate act that brought this question to a head was the publication of the book Elvis: What Happened in 1977, just weeks before his death. It was written by Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler, three members of the Memphis Mafia who had recently been fired. The book was a tell-all expose that detailed Elvis's drug use, his paranoia, and his bizarre behavior. At the time, it was seen by many as a cruel betrayal, an act of revenge by disgruntled former employees. The authors claimed their motive was to shock Elvis into realizing he needed help, a form of love. Whether the book was an act of betrayal or a desperate cry for help is still debated. But it ripped the veil of secrecy off Elvis's private life. It was the first time the public had confirmation of the dark rumors that had been swirling for years. Elvis was reportedly devastated by the book. It was a betrayal by men he considered brothers. So, what is the truth? It's likely not one or the other, but a tragic combination of both. There were friends who loved him, there were also employees who were dependent on him. They were men caught in an impossible situation, lacking the power and the tools to save their friend from himself. Their story is a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of fame and money on friendship. And the questions remain. Could they have done more? What if they had all banded together and threatened to quit unless he went to rehab? Was there any single person in the group who could have gotten through to him? And in the end, did they see themselves as loyal servants to a king, or as helpless witnesses to a slow-motion tragedy? Number 3. Did the affair with Anne Margaret ever truly end? Before Priscilla, before Vegas, there was Anne Margaret. They met in 1963 on the set of the movie Viva Las Vegas. Their chemistry was immediate and explosive, both on and off the screen. They embarked on a passionate, year-long affair. She was his match in many ways, a dynamic performer, a vibrant personality, and one of the few women who wasn't simply overwhelmed by his fame. To many, she was the one that got away. Elvis ultimately chose to honor his commitment to Priscilla, and he and Anne Margaret went their separate ways. But the mystery is, did their connection ever really die? Did it continue in some form into his Las Vegas years? The official story is that their romance ended when he married Priscilla in 1967. Anne Margaret married her husband, actor Roger Smith, shortly after. They moved on with their lives. But the bond they forged was deep and lasting. In her autobiography, And Margaret, My Story, she described Elvis as her soulmate. She wrote about their connection with a passion and a tenderness that suggests it was the great love of her life. She was one of the few people who seemed to understand the man behind the image. During Elvis's Vegas years, Anne Margaret was also a regular headliner in the city. They were both ruling the Strip, sometimes performing in hotels right across the street from each other. This proximity has fueled speculation for years. Did they meet secretly? Did they talk on the phone? Was the flame ever rekindled? Even for a night. There is no hard evidence that they had a physical affair during their respective marriages. Both were intensely private people, but the emotional connection clearly endured. Anne Margaret and her husband would often attend his opening nights in Las Vegas. When she suffered a near-fatal fall from a stage in Lake Tahoe in 1972, Elvis was distraught. He sent a massive guitar-shaped flower arrangement to her hospital room and called her constantly to check on her. It was a gesture of deep and abiding affection, far beyond what one would expect from a casual friend or former co-star. Likewise, she was one of the only celebrities to attend his funeral in Memphis in 1977. It was a brave and public statement of what he had meant to her. While the world mourned the king, she was mourning the man she called EP. Their relationship represents a what if in the Elvis story. What if he had chosen to marry Anne Margaret instead of Priscilla? She was a woman of the world, a fellow performer who understood the pressures of show business. She might have been a stronger partner, less willing to be subsumed by his world. Could she have saved him from his worst impulses? It's impossible to know, but the thought is tantalizing. The movie Viva Las Vegas remains the best evidence of their incredible connection. It is by far his most energetic and joyful movie, and the reason is the palpable chemistry between the two leads. They are not just acting, they are falling in love on screen. For Elvis, who is often bored and listless in his movies, this was a rare moment of genuine engagement. So, while the affair likely ended in a physical sense, the emotional affair, the deep soul connection, probably never did. There were two people who had a profound impact on each other at a formative time in their lives, and that bond transcended marriage, distance, and time. But what do we still not know for sure? Were there secret phone calls from his Vegas suite to hers? Were there quiet meetings away from the prying eyes of the entourage and the public? Did Priscilla or Roger Smith know the full extent of the emotional bond their spouses still shared? And when he was on that Vegas stage singing a love song, was he ever, even once, singing it just for the woman across the street, the one who might have been his queen in another life? Number two, was his physical decline caused by more than just drugs? The official cause of Elvis Presley's death was cardiac arrest. The coroner's report listed a host of contributing factors primarily related to his long-term abuse of prescription drugs. The Fat Elvis caricature of his later years, the bloated face, the weight gain, and the lethargy is almost universally attributed to a terrible diet and a massive intake of pills. But a persistent and compelling mystery surrounds his health. Was there an underlying undiagnosed medical condition that was a primary cause of his decline, with the drug use being a symptom, not the core problem? This theory has gained significant traction over the years, supported by people who were close to him and by medical experts who have re-examined his case. The argument is that Elvis suffered from a range of serious health issues that were either misdiagnosed or poorly understood by his doctors at the time. He complained of chronic pain, high blood pressure, an enlarged colon, and other ailments. Dr. Nick, his personal physician, maintained that he was treating Elvis for these legitimate medical problems and that the drugs were intended as therapy, not recreational abuse. One of the key pieces of evidence cited is genetics. It's known that Elvis's mother, Gladys, died at the young age of 46 from heart failure. Several of her siblings also died young from heart-related issues. This suggests a possible genetic predisposition to heart disease. Modern analysis of Elvis's symptoms, which included an enlarged heart, points to conditions like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a genetic disease that can cause sudden cardiac death. There is also the theory of head trauma. Elvis sustained several head injuries throughout his life, including one on the set of a movie in the 1960s. Some researchers, including his friend and hairdresser Larry Geller, believe that one of these injuries may have triggered an autoimmune disorder. This could explain a wide range of his symptoms, including the chronic pain, the irrational behavior, and the inflammation that led to his bloating and weight gain. In this view, he was using painkillers not to get high, but to cope with a debilitating, undiagnosed condition. The environment of Las Vegas itself was also incredibly unhealthy. The nocturnal schedule, living in a hotel suite with blacked-out windows, the lack of natural sunlight, and the high-stress, high-adrenaline cycle of performing and then crashing would have been punishing for anyone's body. This lifestyle would have exacerbated any pre-existing medical conditions. So which is it? Was he a simple drug addict who ate too many cheeseburgers, a rock and roll cliche? Or was he a man struggling with a complex web of genetic diseases, possible brain trauma, and autoimmune disorders, who used prescription drugs as a desperate and ultimately fatal attempt to manage his pain and continue to function? The truth is likely a tragic combination of all these factors. The drugs were clearly abused and a major part of the problem. But they may not have been the only problem. He may have been a much sicker man, in a physical sense, than anyone realized. This reevaluation of his health is crucial because it changes the narrative. It reframes him not as a weak-willed addict, but as a man fighting a losing battle against his own body. It makes the story more tragic and perhaps more human. But the definitive proof is elusive. The original autopsy report has been the subject of controversy and accusations of a cover-up to protect his reputation. His medical records are private. Without the ability to perform modern genetic testing or a thorough re-examination of all the medical evidence, these theories will remain just that, theories. Was there a single silver bullet diagnosis that would explain everything? Could modern medicine have saved him? And how much did he himself understand about his own health? And how much was he simply told by Dr. Nick that everything was under control? The mystery of what was truly happening inside the king's body is as complex as the mystery of what was happening inside his mind. Number one, who was the real Elvis in the final act? After all the analysis of the money, the music, the women, and the drugs, we are left with the most profound mystery of all. Who was Elvis Presley in those final years in Las Vegas? The image is so fractured. Was he the triumphant king, the swaggering superhero in the white jumpsuit, basking in the adoration of his fans every night? Was he the lonely prisoner, trapped in a penthouse suite, cut off from the real world, a victim of his own fame and his manipulative manager? Was he the spiritual seeker, poring over ancient texts, trying to find his purpose in the universe? Or was he a sick, exhausted man so clouded by a fog of prescription medication that he barely knew who he was anymore? The truth is, he was probably all of them, all at once, and that is the heart of the tragedy. On stage, for brief moments, he could still be the king. When his voice was clear and he connected with a song, especially a gospel number or a powerful ballad like Unchained Melody, the old magic was still there. You can see it in the footage from his final tour. Amid the struggle, there are flashes of brilliance. In those moments, he was the artist, the legend. The crowd saw what they came to see. But hours later, back in the suite, he was someone else entirely. He was a man battling chronic pain, insomnia, and deep loneliness. He was surrounded by people, but profoundly alone. This was the prisoner Elvis, the man Linda Thompson or Ginger Alden, his last girlfriends, would see. The man who needed someone to read to him until he fell asleep, who had moments of paranoia and despair. And then there was the spiritual Elvis, the man who would talk to Larry Geller for hours about God and the cosmos. This was the man who believed he had healing powers, who felt a deep connection to a reality beyond the stage. This was the seeker, the part of him that knew there had to be more to life than the endless cycle of performance and isolation. And finally, there was the patient, the man whose body was breaking down. This was the Elvis that Dr. Nick saw. A man with a host of physical ailments, both real and perhaps psychosomatic, who was dependent on a staggering array of powerful drugs just to get through the day. This version of Elvis was often not in control of his own faculties, his moods, and his actions dictated by the chemical cocktail in his system. These different versions of Elvis were not separate people. They were all fighting for control inside one man. This internal conflict is what makes his final years so compelling and so heartbreaking. He wasn't a simple caricature, he was a deeply complex human being in an impossible situation. The Las Vegas years put all of his contradictions on full display. He was at the peak of his fame and the depths of his personal despair. He was surrounded by love, but dying of loneliness. He was a symbol of incredible vitality who was slowly killing himself. The ultimate unsolved mystery is which of these versions was the real Elvis. Or perhaps the question is flawed. Perhaps they were all real. The tragedy may be that he was never able to integrate these warring parts of himself into a whole, healthy person. The pressures of his life were simply too great. The machine that had been built around him was too powerful. He was a man who had become a myth in his own lifetime, and in the end, the myth devoured the man. So, we are left with the final unanswerable questions. In his quietest moments, when the entourage was gone and the drugs had not yet taken full effect, who did he see when he looked in the mirror? Did he see the boy from Tupelo, the rock and roll revolutionary, the movie star, or just a tired man who had lost his way? Did he know how loved he was, and did he, in the end, have any idea how to save himself?